And welcome to Afternoon Tea with Father Lewis and me. Oh gosh, that sounds terrible already.
It does.
But we're running live and we can't do anything about it, so there we go. So I hope this afternoon of horrible heat, dangerous heat, finds you well and safe and looking after yourselves. Where are we? Well, let me tell you about what's going on in the church. The original idea was to open up the church to 25% of the available space to do with the fire marshals. And we worked out that to provide social distancing, we'd be able to have 44 people in the church. And a number of churches have already done that, but we were thinking of just leaving it a few weeks because the number of COVID-19 infections was rising. Is that infections or the other thing? Hey, Karen, good to see you. But so we kind of put a pause on that and we just was having services with the number 10 remaining. Then we were looking forward, and seems like forever back now, but it's probably only 2 or 3 weeks, to saying, hey, let's do something for July the 4th, which would be, that's a Saturday this year, so it would be July the 5th. Hi, Kit. And we're looking at even more infections and people being diagnosed as COVID-19 positive. So I spoke to the vestry, and we all agree that we just hold things as they are. There are a couple of ideas in the pipeline, though, because we really do want to be trying to innovate and at the same time keep everybody safe. So kind of watch this space. We have a vestry meeting coming up this Tuesday, which we do by video conferencing, teleconferencing. And once we've had that, there will probably be some kind of announcement as how we hope to move forward, even if it's only progressively. So having said all that, we are now open to move forward with where we are in the questions that have already been asked of us. We've done, is it 2 now? 2 questions?
Yes.
It really is Groundhog Day. It just feels weird. Either that or this tea isn't doing anything for me. But that's better. So out of the questions we were asked, this is the one that both intrigued me and scared me in equal measure. Actually, no, there was no contest. It scared me. Hi, Donna. Hi, Buddy. Hi, Holly. Good to see you all. If anybody else is on and you'd like to say hi, please do. And I can tell if you're on Facebook or YouTube. Oh, yeah, I never thought about that.
Oh.
Yeah, did we coordinate? No.
No.
Of course, his has to be. Mine's just an instrument. His has to be notation.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a very pleasant message, though, is it? Hi, Father Bill. Hi, Bill. So, yes, this was asked, and I wanted to run away. I'd sooner talk about the properties of light or, I don't know, something simpler. Because this is a question I asked decades ago, and I didn't like the answer then, and I'm pretty certain I won't like the answer now. But we're going to run into it. And the subject is the Sermon on the Mount. And we're looking at Matthew, there's 2 chapters involved, 5, 6, and 7. Now,
that's 3 chapters.
Is it? I can't count anymore. Let's do the properties of light, please. It's just, I thought it was 2 chapters. No,
5, 6, 7.
Yeah, I really can't count. Okay. Well, and there, I'll leave it to you. So, yes, we'll be looking at however many chapters in the Bible that the Sermon on the Mount spans, but it's from the Gospel of Matthew. Now, we're going to be looking at it in a way similar to how I lead Bible studies on Wednesday mornings. Most of you who've been to a number of those Bible studies will know that I can manage to get through a whole chapter in an hour. Most of you will also know that most of the time we're lucky if we get through one verse.
Or one word.
Oh, yeah. Now, hands up who thinks we're going to get through a chapter today. Well, let me tell you, before you wear your keyboards out, we're not even going to be looking at the Sermon on the Mount today because, as always, context is important. I do have to let you know, though, that when we do get to the Sermon on the Mount, we'll be following it primarily using the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible, which is the one we use for our Sunday readings, the lectionary readings. But we will also be using versions other than. So don't feel you need to go and buy a new Bible, although it's good if you do. That's if you don't have the NRSV. There's always websites like BibleGate.org, or is it .com? You just put Google Biblegate, and it's spelled as it sounds, Bible and Gate. And there you can take the pick of literally hundreds of different versions, all in English. So we'll be using the NRSV as our primary tool, but we'll also be using other versions as we look at the language. But that's not this week, and it may not be next week either, but we will see. Why are we going to go through it so slowly? Why do I fear it so much? Well, part of the reason is because this part of the Bible has been so important to the church. You cannot underestimate how important it is, for example, to the life of the early church and the early church fathers. They wrote and wrote and wrote about this to the point that they wrote about these chapters. I know they said these three there. These chapters, they wrote about these chapters more than anything else in Scripture. It's that important. It's been said that the Sermon on the Mount is revolutionary, countercultural, radical. What other words would you want to use for it?
Transformational.
Yeah, a whole host of other words, which when you use those kind of words in other contexts, can be scary. And so there's a good reason for using this. What else can we say about it? Well, from when you open Matthew's Gospel, it's the first thing we come across that has Jesus teaching. So it's important for that way. And it's from the get-go, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount talks about something more than personal ethics and behavior. When people think of the Sermon on the Mount, they mostly concentrate on the Beatitudes, the blessed is, blessed are. Hi, Anne. Good to see you. Hi, Donna. So, if he's talking about something more than personal ethics and personal behavior, then what is he talking about? Well, it's something far deeper. He seems to be talking about the essence of human being. And, I mean, if you want to do the at that point, feel free. This is something I kind of love, discussing the kind of philosophical side of things, the kind of naturalistic side of why are we here, what's it all about, and all those deep questions. But with Jesus offering those kind of things, then we need to slow the pace down and truly listen to what Jesus is saying and seeing if we can unwrap what it is he is trying to say. And if we do that, we may find this is a very, very uncomfortable journey. Hence why I've always put it off. And hence why a lot of clergy that I've heard preach on this have managed to do the whole thing within the 10 or 15 minutes of a sermon, the whole lot. But all you remember about it is the little story they added to it. For instance, somebody spoke about being in a helicopter and then mentioned about all the Beatitudes, and I can't remember anything else he said apart from the fact that he was in a helicopter. So this is how we're going to look at the Sermon on the Mount. This is how we're going to follow Jesus, basically. Next week, we're going to look at the social, historical. Are you planning something else for your calendar? So you
No,
can't
I'm
be
turning
here?
making sure I'm turned off. I just realized I had it on.
Alrighty. So next week, we're going to be looking at the social, historical, well, we've got literal and theological perspectives and its language. You can never forget that. This week, we're going to look at our own time and culture. We're going to look at what we've inherited and how it leads to our own sense of human being. Who do we think we are? Who do we think we are meant to be? You know, there's that, active verb going on. Who do we think we are? Who do we think we're meant to be? And it's all done with an existential and ontological context. And there's two nice big words, which Father Lewis is now going to unpack for you.
He throws them out. I have to scale them. Ontological means a sense of being, what it is that constitutes the beingness of a person or a thing. What was the other? Existentialism?
Existential, yeah.
Oh, now I'm going to let you do that one.
It's a pondering upon...
It's navel gazing.
Yes, it's a pondering upon the fact that we are. But it's done almost in third person. When you read a lot of the existential books, it's like, I feel seated. And as I looked at my cup of tea, I realized the futility of it all. So if you read books like Sartre, Camus, people like that, well, let's just say that existentialism and suicide, there's a kind of link there.
That reminds me of the cartoon of Jesus asking his disciples, "Who do you say I am?" And the disciples answer, "You are the ground of our being, the charisma in which we find the meaning of our interpersonal relationships." And Jesus said, "What?"
The good old days.
Yes.
So, we're going to be looking at those things, but we'll try to make it more user-friendly, he says. And we'll be using two views to develop this idea of being. One naturalistic, that'll be me, and the other one Christocentric, which will be Father Lewis. And I'll let Lewis sort of talk about the Christocentric view.
One of the things that struck me when I was thinking about this was that the Sermon on the Mount opens Jesus' public ministry. And in fact, what it does is it tells us what it is like to live in the kingdom. What are the attributes of people living in the kingdom of God? And if we believe that Jesus is perfect man and perfect God, he embodies all the Beatitudes. He embodies the Sermon on the Mount. And he shows us what we could be if there had not been the fall of Adam. We're talking about a big, big topic. And the Christological viewpoint has to do with being a perfect human in the sense of reflecting the imago Dei, the image of God.
Now, having said that, this would mean that Jesus transcends all of time, which we believe he does, which means that what he said back then applies just as much to us in our day, in our experience, in our sense of being, as it did to those who heard him originally. Which, again, is a super huge topic, which should frighten everyone. Which is why I chose the easier path of talking in a naturalistic way, looking at a kind of anthropological approach to what does it mean to be human, which eventually, because I am a man of faith, soon joins the road of faith, because you can't get very far in talking about what it is to be human without starting using words such as aspire and reflect and observe, which carries a lot of baggage, because, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Now, all these things together, we're going to cover in 45 minutes. And as you know, we're going to be skimming big time. But the thing here is what's being offered to us should really be disturbing for us all. Disturbing in both a positive and a negative way. Only because we will be required to examine everything about ourselves, our culture, our religion, our political biases, all these things and more in the light of Jesus' own words. And we may not like what we hear. So that's the framework. And if you want to throw in a question, it may be that we don't get to it because we've moved on 20 seconds by the time we see it. Then, yes, giddy up. Let's get on this horse and get out of town. All right. So the first thing is, what does it mean to be human? From an anthropological sense, we have risen to our present state as part of the hominids. And we are able to self-reflect. We're able to see ourselves in a way that many other creatures can't. The science says that we're finding more and more creatures who can in some small way. But we do it to a degree that we don't find in other animals, at least land creatures. And what does that mean? Well, I can think about my actions. I can think of stuff that I can call good and I can call bad. I can think about my future and I can think about my own demise, that there will be a time when I am no more. However much I love my dog, I don't think he does that. Although he did kind of mind meld thing on me this afternoon. He came into the den when I was watching TV and he just stared at me. And I thought, I need to give him some treats. And the dog walked out, and by the time I'd gotten up and gone out, he was waiting by his good boy Bicky box for me to give him the treat he told me I needed to give him. So maybe there is something more. But within the terms of being, it sets up a whole other arena of things, because a lot of what I think I can be and become is culturally tied. Now, what makes this more interesting, I think, for you, is the fact that Father Lewis and myself come from two different cultures. I'm English, and Father Lewis is
American.
He's American. And so it sets up for a different sense of what it means to do certain things, what it means to be environmentally aware. And I don't mean in the sense of saving your plastic bottles and putting them in the right trash can. I mean, to sort of live within the world, to live and move and have your being. And so what does it mean to be human in this is that we are the highest evolved creature, and we have thumbs. It allows us to do things that other creatures cannot do. But the highly evolved brain taps into some incredible way of experiencing things and doing things and inventing things and controlling things, not just in small scale, but in the large scale. And so when we do that, when it comes to what we've done, we then create a series of values. I mentioned good and bad. Well, where do they come from? Are they arbitrary? Do they have universal merit? Or are they very localized? Within morals and ethics and law and politics, we can talk about human rights. Are there any? Is there something intrinsically, as part of being this two-legged thing, that we say we can have a right to? Can those rights change? Now, coming from England, there was a certain understanding of what it was to be English, that we had a history of owning, or at least lording it over a quarter of the planet at one point, that we were important historically and militarily, that we'd always had a beef with France, so we shouldn't like the French. The Germans were weird and had no sense of humour. And within all this, I lived in a system that looked after me. I had the National Health Service. I went to the doctor. I went to the dentist. I went to the optician at the age of 4 because I had weird eyes, more like a lizard than anything else, and I didn't pay a bean. Public transport was vast and the options huge. Education, again, there was an expectation. You go to school, you learn stuff. But what was the reason for going to school? And I went to school during a time of change. There was a real philosophical change as to how you teach people. So it was a really, it wasn't interesting. It was a horrible time because we were basically guinea pigs. But there was those kind of questions. I mean, what in your experience, you were slightly different because you were also an Air Force brat as well,
Yeah.
weren't you?
I moved around the country. But one of the things that I remember from a class in college was that the teacher said, "We're not here to feed you information. We're here to teach you how to think." And I was sitting there going, wow, that's the first time I ever heard something like that. Because in high school, it was all about learning all these facts and dates and so on and kind of being able to regurgitate them on paper. So to understand that education is more than information was kind of a big moment for me. I wanted to back up for just a minute. When we were talking about being a human being, I believe it was Jane Goodall, who is a primatologist, and she was teaching a class at a university. And one of the students asked the question, when did we become human beings? And the student suggested, well, was it when we invented tools? Was it language? Was it writing? What was it that sparked becoming a human being? And Jane Goodall's reply was, she had a slide of some bones that were found in Israel, and these were Neanderthal bones, and one was a leg bone, And it was evident that the bone had been broken very badly, to the point that this person would not have been able to walk. And the bone healed and was knit together again. And Jane Goodall said, "This is the evidence of us becoming human, when we begin to care for one another, when there's that sense of empathy and compassion." And Jane Goodall, I don't believe, is a believing Christian, but she got my attention real quick when I heard that story.
Well, this is part of the conundrum because I subscribe to a lot of the YouTube channels that are to do with atheists, some of them better than others. And some of the discussions they have are well worth listening to from my perspective. And yet, I've always been disappointed when it comes to creating a foundational rationale for morals and ethics, because most of the history of mankind has been to do with trying to survive and then power and control. And it's always been the minority in having the power and the control over the majority, no matter how big the kingdoms were or fiefdoms were back in the day. But within this, there is still, I suppose it's like talking about the mob, the mafia. There's a code that they keep, and you don't break the code because you end up dead. I mean, it's the basics of it. But could that just be the basis of a code? Well, to me, the only basis that we could have is something that we would all want to agree to, and that would be something that we call nowadays the social contract. And as soon as you use the word social, I'm not listening to it, because people soon move into socialism as communism, and this is America, and I'm free, and a lot of other junk.
And I don't have to wear a mask.
Oh, good grief, tell me about it. Yeah, yesterday in Home Depot. Yeah, anyway, a social contract where we agree as a community, doesn't matter what the size is, to certain things. So, for instance, we agree that we will pay a certain percentage in things we call taxes so that we can have a police force. And, I know it's kind of a bad word to use at the moment, but, that's where we are in this. We do that. Things like education, so that we have schools. And it doesn't matter what kind of education we're talking about. It's just part of things. We pay money towards taxes so that we have roads that don't trash your suspension, in theory. Sewers, stuff like that. The infrastructure which keeps us going. And the legal system, so that there are laws. If you do this is the consequence of all that. And we all agree to that, and people do it to various degrees. The degrees to which I was involved as being British seems to be more than what happens in the US, which seems to be different than what happens, say, in Italy or Germany or Sweden or Russia or China. And part of that is to do not only with what seemed to be part of that social contract, but also the amount of control you have personally to be involved in that social contract. So, for instance, within the communist scheme of things in China, you're told basically what to do. You're overpowered. So there are things you do, but not because you particularly agree with it, but because you're told to. Whereas from my culture, where we have the national health system, we could complain about it till the cows come home, but it still worked. It was still there for us. And if you're considering what's going on now with the COVID-19 and people being told initially that by the government that the government would pay their medical bills, and no, don't say that. No, they'll pay for the test. So a lot of people are now going into hospitals, and if they don't have the insurance, what's going to happen? That is not a worry in the UK or in Italy or Germany. Yes, they may pay a bit more taxes, but it's just part of the contract that they've become involved with. The same with working conditions. I had to work in Italy. There are 4 weeks paid leave, plus all the saints' days.
No. 6 weeks.
6 weeks, sorry. 6
6
weeks paid
weeks.
leave. Plus, if you get married, you get 2 weeks honeymoon. Are you listening, Crystal? Hi, Crystal. And a lot of other benefits if you're in Italy. Oh, you get an hour and a half for lunch every day. You work 36 hours a week, and that lunch time's included in that. And yet their productivity is equal to or more than the average American. Other things. See, those kind of things shift how you see the world. They shift how who am I? What does it mean for me to be? Do things change? Do rights change? Well, we're living through that period now where people are sick to death of having the police who say they are to serve and protect and don't, because they find themselves the police are protecting themselves from all the bad stuff they've been doing to a part of the community. That the black community don't sign up to agree to have a part of the social contract abuse them. They don't sign up and pay their taxes so that their educational system can be substandard, or their housing isn't looked after the same way. So they're looking at the same things as we are in America, but their understanding of what it is to be is a lot different.
I think one of the saddest things I have seen on Facebook are it's photographs that a dad took from the living room window. He was watching his son, a black boy, play, I guess, basketball or whatever it was, out on the driveway, and the police drove by, and the boy hid behind the family car because he was afraid. And there is something fundamentally wrong when children have to be afraid of law enforcement.
Now, what other things? Father Lewis was talking about education. My granddad, who was born in 1903, lived through the kind of Edwardian period of English history. His education was incredible. He learned Latin, French, some German. He did a load of stuff. He learned in English grammar in a really detailed way. He learned the Bible as well. And he came out, then he went to university and he did a degree in, chemistry. But there was one or two kinds of chemistry. As I said, I went to school and they were changing what it meant to be taught. I never did any English grammar. I never learned another language. It felt like we were being passed on. So the next teacher will teach you the things you need to know. And it never happened. And part of the reason for that was because there was a shift from learning for learning's sake towards creating a product that industries needed. So what were the industries at the time? Well, I was born in the 60s, but I left school 1978, by which time everything was changing. Technologies were changing, computers were coming in, old skills were dying off, apprenticeships were dying off because they just weren't needed. Everything was up in the air, and we were left, it wasn't just my year, it was a few other years as well, with no marketable skills. And you can see the results of what happened when the economy crashed, because it was really, really difficult. I was one of the lucky ones because I was part of a group who just loved learning, and we actually had some good teachers who wanted to encourage this small group, 5 or 6 people. But you see how different it is now. And I never did any homework. I did my exams at the end of it all, but that was it. And where are we? In Florida, we're going through yet another change because we don't want to do the core curriculum. Parents are complaining that the kids are over tested. Teachers are complaining that all they're doing is teaching to a test. Well, go to, was it Finland, Norway, Sweden? It's one of the Nordic countries.
Finland.
No homework. No real formal schooling.
They go to school for 4 hours.
Yeah. And then they go and hang out with the pals. And yet they are number one in terms of outcomes and educational advances. Their understanding of who they are and what it means is different. Let's look at the war on drugs. Probably the final one because we need to move on a bit. The war on drugs. This untold billions. So many people have died. It could be seen to be an excuse to incarcerate countless people for petty reasons, and so that they lose their liberty, they lose their right to vote, they lose all sorts of things, all for silly things. Welcome Portugal, where if you take drugs, hey, it's no big deal. If you sell drugs, it's still a big deal. But the society has given up trying to police it. They're there to want to help you. So if you find yourself struggling with an addiction, there's a gazillion addiction centers for you to enter so you can...
Free of charge.
Yeah, free of charge, so you can clean yourself up. And there's no stigma involved. You're not stuck in jail. You're not put in front of a judge. You're not outcast. You don't have... It used to be in Portugal that they would list and photograph you and put you in the paper, kind of name and shame. And they realized it didn't work. And so they've changed the whole way. And it does seem to be working pretty well. And when I was last in Portugal, went to visit one of the rehab centers. And it was pretty sweet. It really was nice. And the people were ordinary folk who, let me just try this, and then boom, their lives fell apart because addiction is a really big and terrible thing. And you see how, again, it shifts how we perceive other people, and it shifts how we see ourselves. For a final look, let's look at different ways of doing healthcare. In Germany, if you're feeling stressed out, don't worry. Get your doctor to sign a prescription and go off for 2 weeks to your local spa, all paid for in your slightly higher taxes.
And you still get your salary.
Mm-hmm. And you can take your kids with you if you need to. You can just unwind. And then, because the realization is that if you're a stressed out, worried to pieces person, your output's going to be lower. You're going to be sick more often. You're going to cost more in the long run. And so what they're trying to do is prevent all this. As I said, this can be pretty disturbing to us. And you may think, oh, this is all a political hijack, this, that, and the other. But we're talking about what it is to be a human being. And if the only point we ever use is our own point of reference, then we're not going to move forward when we actually look at what Jesus says from his perspective. And as we mentioned before, if Jesus is fully God and fully man, and if he did live the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, then we claim to be Christian, it really behooves us to listen to him and what he's trying to tell us.
There is an Orthodox hymn that incorporates the Beatitudes. And the opening line is, "Remember, Lord, when you come into your kingdom, your servants." If you have a hymnal, it has been included in our hymnal. I think it's 566. I think that's the hymn. It's kind of a statement of we are living with one foot in turmoil and one foot in the kingdom of God. And we are now being called to put both feet in the kingdom. And this morning I was thinking about the Beatitudes and how often, at least from my experience, I always heard them repeated in a very kind of, blessed are the poor. blessed are the meek. It was very, the tone might not have been negative, but it certainly wasn't positive. And I thought, what would it be if we took those phrases and said them with joy? This is who we are, and this is how we're going to live. I think it kind of shakes things up a bit.
It reminds me of the Robert Powell movie, the Jesus of Nazareth.
Oh, yeah.
I cannot think about it or watch it anymore without turning it into some kind of Monty Python sketch, because this Jesus, as portrayed by Robert Powell, the Western blue-eyed, long-haired, handsome hunk, he mumbled all the time. And when he sits down on the rock for his Sermon on the Mount, he kind of, blessed. Now, in my Monty Python-esque mind, what was that, Jesus? Misty are the flies. Speak up, we can't hear you. Mumble, mumble, mumble. And however Jesus did it, he didn't mumble it. And he didn't do it in this kind of passive sense either. One of the things that kind of gets me, and it's nothing to do with envy, it's to do with why, the question why. It's to do with that existential thing, the why question. And that's to do with, what does it mean when we put value on work? I've watched Star Trek, and Captain Picard talks about the time when we don't use money anymore. We've gone beyond that because we just see the value of everything people do and blah blah blah. He does a nice little soliloquy about the whole thing. And this latest incarnation, that's all changed somewhat, but that's a digression. Anyway, what does it mean? If I say to you this question, what comes to your mind, or more specifically to your heart straight away? And the question is anyone worth $1 million? Is anyone worth $1 billion? So that's two questions. One question slightly rephrased. Because when I look at those who actually make the big money in sports, for what? For catching a ball? Because it's not really football, is it? But that's yet another subject. For hitting a piece of wood with a stick. For being a CEO of some company that you still get all the money for even when that company fails. For being an actor. For being a successful musician but having less talent than 99% of the rest of the world. What is it? Where's the value in that? Where's the fairness in that? I mean, at the moment we're sort of everyone's going out and going rah 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 for all the medical profession, and yet some of them are having to do two jobs in the US because they can't afford to live. Similar thing with bus drivers, and this is an upside down world in which we live. As a naturalist, where can I find the value in those things? And it's not to do with rarity. It's not to do with scarcity is probably the better word. It's not to do with someone's position of having a skill set which is so in demand because there's a billion actors. Some of them way better than some that we actually see in movies. It's the same with sports, same with music, the same in whatever area you want to look at. But we seem to award the wrong thing quite often. Why does that happen? What is that to do with who we are as a people nowadays?
I just wanted to assure you that you have not tuned into wearesocialists.com, because what we're talking...
Speak for yourself.
What we are talking about is not a political agenda.
No, this is...
It's a Christian
Well,
agenda.
it's not even that first. It's a human agenda. What is it? What does it mean? What have we been brought up in? How has it affected us? And this is why the two perspectives works here, because how I've been brought up and the expectations of what it is for me to be human, to follow laws, to follow the police, to have an education, to the whole thing within a political system which is multifaceted, because there isn't just two parties. There's the raving Lord Such, the monster raving loony party that is real, with raving Lord Such. I wonder if he's still alive. I'd have to Google that. No, I'd have to research it. No, I'd have to use my favorite search engine to do that. But yeah, Monster Raving Loony Party, it exists. And it's within that you create your political ideas and what it means. When it comes over to you with a religious, a Christological perspective.
I think I just said it.
Did you? I'll say it again.
It's not a political statement. It's a Christian statement. It's the statement of Christian values as counterpoint to the world. And I think in the baptismal covenant in the prayer book, we cover quite a lot of these issues.
Yeah.
Care for the environment, care for one another, respecting the dignity of every human being.
And we're so short on that at the moment.
Yeah. So it's not we're not espousing a particular political point of view. But if you want to talk to me on my right-wing days, I tend to be kind of a communist. That's when I'm a right-wing.
Right wing?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So I'm way out there on my left-wing days.
Okay. I'm all over the map. I'm pro-life, but I'm pro-life. So in very rare instances do I believe abortion is permissible. But then I do believe that a child should be able to grow up in an environment that doesn't create poverty, does have good education and a schooling system and a care system. Because if you're pro-life, you want to enhance and sustain and support that life. And right to the end, I do not believe in capital punishment. I think it's just judicial murder. And we're all our hands are stained in the blood of all those people.
I saw an interview with a nun, and she was talking about the pro-life movement. And she said, what we have in this country is not pro-life, it's pro-birth, because we don't care how those children are treated after they're born. We don't provide for them with the necessary elements of living a human life.
So I'm also somebody who believes that in free speech, and hate what's going on college campuses when people are being shut down because they have a different view than everybody else. I believe we need to hear the views of people with whom we disagree. It's part of the educational process. One of the greatest things I received from my college years was to hear people whose views I thought I absolutely hated, but until I actually heard them espoused, and then I thought, there's a kind of rationale behind this. I mean, some people, there is no rationale. But in the UK, for instance, they banned a person going over. I can't remember, from France, I think. This is before I left. Who was going to speak about why the Holocaust is a myth. He didn't believe in the Holocaust. And there was such an uproar about this, which is understandable, that he was banned from coming into the country. And I just think that is wrong. Not to hear alternate views, even if they are ahistoric, even if they're stupid. Some of them are time wasting. Such as, why would you want to debate something like the Flat Earth Society? I think we've been there, done that. and you know, we have the photographs from the International Space Station. So it's weird. Yeah, Anne says, move from individual ethical to political. National Health Service there. Are you both making move that many do not making move that is that making moves that many do not agree with, especially in the US? There are many in England who would disagree. There's been a long move to try and dismantle the National Health Service in England. And it does have its problems. And with a lot of these things, there are. I read a book once which talked about that everything started falling apart after Queen Elizabeth I set up the first poor laws. It goes back that far. And the
Old as the prayer book.
the reason why the poor laws were introduced is because her dad, Henry VIII, ransacked all the monasteries, and they're the ones who looked after the poor. They were hospitals, they were hospitable, and the convents as well. And boy, you've got a good argument if you're going all that. We're going back centuries. Yes, many people do not agree with these things, and many people do. But this is part of the conversation. What does it mean to be human? Such a person who would disagree, who would agree with, say, capital punishment, would have to admit that there is that we are able, in some ethical way, even a judicial way, to say it's okay to kill your own. That for me is a mind shift too far. I cannot get my head around it. Some people, it may be that you're not. Life isn't here to treat you fairly. We're still in a kind of caveman mentality, so to speak. But this is where you ask the question: can the rights that you have, say in the Bill of Rights, for instance, can they change? Do they move? And I would say that they do. We have inoculations for things now. The expectation is that most people will get a flu injection, and it wasn't that long ago before everyone got the measles, mumps, and rubella, and the other childhood diseases. We do that because it helps. It's cost effective. It helps society. Now we're getting people who opt out because of their own personal rationale about these things, that they are poisoning us. These things cause autism. And no matter how many studies are done which prove otherwise, they refuse to do it. And what's happening now? We are getting an uptick in the number of kids having these diseases we thought had been eradicated. You could say the same thing about the people who refuse to wear masks. Is it a personal right? It's a very good question. Is it about me, or do we sign into a social contract that says we will do what we can to help everybody else at the same time? What would Jesus say at that point? So thanks for that, Anne. It's like Father Lewis says, this is not meant to be a political and social commentary rant, but we have to start here, because when we do start looking at what we believe, we can soon become upset. It soon disturbs us to the very core of who we are, which is precisely the point. Because if we haven't even reflected on who we are, and believe me, most people going through life have not even begun that journey. And the worst thing is that many who claim the name Christian haven't begun that journey. They just they bolt on Jesus to what they do already and think they're Christianizing everything. Jesus will not allow us to do this. He wants us to confront our preconceived notions as to who we are and who we think we should be. And he wants to change. And which is why this is frightening stuff. And is the reason why I've studiously avoided it. Do I want to change? Do I feel good with my own views about everything? Yeah, because basically everyone's their own God. Cats know they're God, dogs think we're God, and we know we are. And we want to just put in, we have a God built in our own image. Sometimes that's a national image. We never mention nationalism in the US or in the UK. But, you know, that exists as a thing. But you see, we can spread these things out from the individual to the general to the national, and think we're still doing a Christian thing. And yet, are we? That's the hanging question. Well, it's 3:55, and I think that's a heavy dude deal for an afternoon. I don't know about you, but this tea is not strong enough. And I know I can have this. Hey, oh, hey Nev, how you doing? Nev, let me introduce a friend of mine. For those of you who are on Facebook, you can see him. With the keyboard player in the band was in. Went to the same school, almost all the same schools. I went to Bradley Green. I think Nev stayed at Oakfield. I'm not sure now. And he was a keyboard player, brilliant guy. And yeah, Screaming Lord Sutch of the Monster Raving Loony Party passed away in 1999. And I never knew it. Nev, is the party still going? Is it still functioning as a party?
That will take a moment to answer.
Yeah. Now, for those of you who have just tuned in and wondering what am I talking about, you'll have to go back and find it out. As a final thing, there was a lot of hubbub about adding certain questions about, I can't remember, it was legal status or something like in this census for the US, which is ongoing. Not the hubbub, but the census is ongoing. In one of the censuses I was in, Sensai, that's something Japanese, in the UK, one of the questions they asked was, what is your religious affiliation? And so many people put Jedi, they wrote Jedi down. You'll like this, Paula, that Jedi is now an official religion in the UK. The power of the people.
Instead of getting a candle when you when you're initiated into the Jedi, do you get a lightsaber?
I guess so. And you learn how to speak in weird rhythmical.
Chewbacca.
That's just me on a Sunday morning. No, what is the little guy with the big ears?
Yoda.
Yoda, yeah. Yoda, amazed I am.
Yeah.
So there you go. It's all really deep and meaningful in a really scary way, and we've skimmed the absolute surface of this. This is high-level courses in sociology and psychology and theology and anthropology and a bunch of other stuff. Baptismal lightsabers. Love it. Oh, I want to be involved in the revision of the prayer book now.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
But this sets us up. So for this week, your challenges, gosh, I'm going to sound like...
Homework.
Yeah. If you accept this, Mr. Phelps, to think about your core beliefs about who you are and what you think everything's about and where you think that comes from. And if you've got pen and paper or you're good at typing or whatever, just jot those things down and just keep looking at them and think about the implications of those things and where they might have come from. A lot of it's encultured. We just grow up in a certain place and we accept everything as is. Sometimes we get it from our parents. Sometimes we kick against our parents, so we do the exact opposite, etc., etc. But take that seriously, that little bit of homework, and see what you can come up with. And once you start thinking of those things, we will be able to put them against the light of Christ. So next week we will be looking at the kind of context in which Jesus spoke those words, and what they may have meant to the people who originally heard him speak, and what the early church thought of those things. So thanks for putting up with us, well, at least me. Father Lewis is all sweetness and light.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and he agrees. So have a good week. Please do keep safe. Thank you for spending this time with us, and God bless.
Goodbye.